The video that I'm going to make here is partly reference to something I've just seen a video link to a Femen protest in Madrid. So there was a statue being unveiled of Donald Trump, and a Femen protest. She looked like she was on her own. Went up and gestured towards the statue's nether regions and shouted in Spanish, "Grab patriarchy by the balls." Okay, well, you get the gist. Femin has become well known for its publicity stunts, and I think that's a fair way to describe them. I think they themselves would acknowledge that it is about publicity. Um, they famously ran towards Vladimir Putin topless. They've done that with other world leaders. As a protest method, I'm not sure really what it changes. I think people can't work out if they're serious or not. So I'm not sure if all feminists even agree with that particular approach. Anyway, leaving that aside, looking at the comments, there was a few feminists kind of saying things. Well, one comment caught my attention, and it was basically all the male comments here prove why feminism is necessary. And what she was criticizing was the fact that there were some comments from guys that were basically ad hominem attacks, like if all feminists are as fat and ugly as her, then that's why we don't need feminism or something like that. Well, here's the first thing I want to say. Incidentally, as the title says, this is a video I want to talk to or reach out to um, moderate feminists. Any moderate feminists, particularly women. I know there's guys as well, but all I would ask is you listen to the end of this video, and if you don't agree with me, that's fine. But please just hear what I have to say. So, in terms of ad hominem attacks, in that sense, i.e., attacking someone for the way they look, I think that's nonsense. I I don't care if a feminist is really plain, she looks like a plain Jane, whatever. Or whether she's a stunningly beautiful woman. To me, that's irrelevant. What is relevant is what her arguments are, and where I agree or disagree with what she is saying. So I do agree that attacking someone for being fat is not a way to attack their point of view, and that works both ways. Feminists shouldn't attack, um, I don't know, Trump supporters for being fat. It's an ad hominem stupid point of critique. Um, in terms of the patriarchy claim, well, this was in Spain and Madrid, so I'm not sure if she was having a go at Spanish patriarchy or American patriarchy or just patriarchy in general. Um, is it a man's world? In many ways, it is. I think it would be hard to say that it isn't. Most world leaders are still men, and there are a lot of other areas that arguably are controlled by men. In Britain, I don't think it is. In Britain, in this country, we have a female head of government, a female head of state, um, a female home secretary. Most of our regional leaders are women. Nicola Sturgeon, Arlene Foster, um, Diane Wood is the leader of the Welsh Nationalists. Um, so the idea that Britain is run by men, I think, is frankly a lot of nonsense. Certainly not at present. It might have been true in 1870, but well, even then there was a woman head of state. But my point is, sometimes I think patriarchy is one of those things that gets thrown around a little bit. Um, I want to make this video relatively basic, and I just want to basically make a few points to reasonable, moderate feminists. I guess I should define what I mean by that. What I basically mean is the sort of feminists who are willing to listen to other point of views and who are willing to listen without just calling people names and who don't hate men and who basically um, they have good intentions, they believe in equality, they believe there are issues that impact women and they want to campaign on that, but they don't have any animosity towards men in general, and they also recognise that there are issues that impact men. Now, to my line of thinking, that is a moderate feminist. But unfortunately, and this is where the problem lies, what I notice is it's a little bit like actually when Islam is criticized. When Islam is criticized, when we see Islamist attacks, almost always that is followed up by Muslims saying, "Oh, Islam has nothing to do with terrorism, and do not tar all Muslims with the same brush, etc." Okay, but it's irrefutable that there are Muslim terrorists, and it's irrefutable that there is terrorism carried out in the name of Islam, right? The same token, when people criticize feminism for a wide range of issues, and I say people because there are actually a lot of women that criticize it as well. When people criticize its double standards, obnoxious attitudes from certain leading feminists, um, male bashing, a whole list of things. Very often I see comments like, "Oh, but this isn't what feminism's really about. Feminism's just about equality." And it's almost like a PR drive where women, especially who identify themselves as feminists, feel the need to defend it. Now, I get it. If you believe in an ideology, it's natural that you want to defend it. It's a bit like if you're in a political party, you feel naturally inclined to defend it. But I also think you have to acknowledge where this criticism comes from. It isn't made up by the media. It isn't like men just deciding they don't like feminism for no reason. The criticism has a basis, right? And if you refuse to acknowledge that basis, that's a non starter. So if your attitude is, "Oh, these are just men who don't want equality for women," it's totally misguided. Because I guarantee you, the majority of critics of feminism, at least in the Western context, I'm not talking about more conservative, theocratic societies. I'm talking about the Western context and the context of liberal democracies. The fact of the matter is, most people who take issue with feminism really, really aren't of the opinion they want to keep women in kitchens and they want all like men just to have the power. I really don't think that is a guiding mentality. I think the hostility to feminism comes from the fact that feminism itself is seen as hostile. And where does this come from? It doesn't come from some sort of anti feminist propaganda, it comes from the very words and actions of feminists themselves. And this is something that I would urge reasonable feminists to try and understand. Okay, I'm not saying don't have your conviction. I'm not saying don't call yourself a feminist. You could call yourself whatever you want. But let's just be honest here. The number of people within the movement who constantly complain about men and blame men for everything are not a small minority, actually. There's quite a lot of them. Okay? And if you're seeing it from a point of view of a man, what you see is never ending criticism of men in general. So you can hardly be surprised when people turn around and say, "Oh, it's an anti male movement," because very, very, very rarely is there a situation when feminists make a public sort of announcement or some sort of move without it being about the wicked patriarchy. And inevitably, that then comes into an attack on men. So I get it. Individual feminists may not hate men, but as a movement, it is very, very hard to escape. There is blatant anti male undertones. I mean, this is just something that cannot be ignored. Um, Whenever there is a feminist campaign, there are anti-male undertones in it, even if if it's organizers say that it's nothing to do with bashing men. That's how it comes across. When you constantly scapegoat half of humanity for whatever problems women face, yeah, that then gets translated as male bashing. So I think they need to acknowledge that. There also needs to be an acknowledgement that there is a strong perception of double standards within the movement. Why, for example, do feminists campaign for women to be released from prison? If it's really about equality, surely it should also therefore be about equal responsibility, therefore equal criminal responsibility. So feminists cannot one day say, "Oh, we've nothing against men, we believe in equality for everyone," and then the next day say, "Oh, they shouldn't go to jail because they're women." No, you can't have it both ways. So either you just call yourself a female supremacist if that is your thinking, or that you believe in female privilege, because that is fundamentally what that comes down to. If you believe a woman shouldn't go to jail because she is a woman, then frankly, that is what it is. You believe in female privilege. Now, if you're truly egalitarian, you would agree if someone commits the same crime in the same circumstances, they should serve the same sentence. Now, surely that's a reasonable position. That is an egalitarian position. Who can argue that it isn't? Um, so I think the failure to acknowledge those sort of double standards is problematic. Now I get it. There will be people watching this who say, "Oh, but I do agree with that. I agree that women, should have equal responsibility and all that." Okay, wonderful. But you need to go further and you need to actually criticize and call out those feminists who don't take that position and who do believe in female privilege. And I think it's this kind of apathy from moderate feminists that is part of the problem. So they themselves are egalitarian fundamentally in nature, and they're not anti-male. In many cases, they might be married to men, happily married, or they might have boyfriends or whatever. So I've always rejected that idea that all feminists are anti-male. I think that's a little bit childish, and I don't believe it. I personally actually know feminists in my life. That is women who describe themselves as feminists. I think they're very decent people. I like them. I like their personality, and I certainly don't get the impression they're sort of hostile to me as a guy. But I do think that instead of just complaining about your movement having a bad image, do something about it. Look at the misandrists within the movement and call them out. Say, no, this is not what this is supposed to be about. You're giving us a bad image. Stop it. And I just don't see enough of that happening. Emma Watson did touch on something with that famous speech she made at the UN because she did acknowledge issues that are faced by men. Um, so that was more progressive than some of the things we've been seeing. But I still feel that it was he for she. I insist it should have been he and she because that would send out a message of solidarity, i.e., men sticking up for women and standing up for women's rights. Great, but I mean, she acknowledged herself in the speech that there are issues that men face disproportionately. And women who care about the men in their lives, mothers, sisters, girlfriends, they would want to look out for the men in their lives. So why not he and she? I really don't see why that would be so controversial. The problem with he for she is it sends out a message of it's almost archaic. It's almost like a knightly thing, like chivalry or something. And the problem with that is it becomes archaic. And I think it just sends out the wrong message. Um, because anyone who wants to argue, and this is the problem, there is a strong perception that it is divisive by nature. Because when feminists say things like, "Oh, the patriarchy is keeping us down," and what that then ultimately gets translated into is all men are privileged, all women are downtrodden. Now, feminists won't use those words, but that is the message that is being sent out. And that is a divisive message. It's like saying all white people are racist and all black people aren't. Any ideology or any movement that seeks to pitch people against each other is problematic. That's why I don't call myself a feminist. So I acknowledge that there are moderate, reasonable people within the movement, but I think as a movement, it's doing far more to divide people than build bridges. I really do. Because that is not, from reading angry men's websites or something. It's just from what I see from feminists themselves. Incidentally, I am not a masculist because I believe if I describe myself as a masculist, then it's going down the same line of um, saying we are the victims and they are the oppressors. And that's another issue I take with feminism, this constant victimhood narrative. Certainly, there are issues that impact women. I'm not for a second disputing that. But when you send out the message that the men are in control and women are victims, you're ignoring the fact there are some very privileged women out there, and you're ignoring the fact that there are some men who are very far from privileged. So I think it is extremely important that reasonable feminists just think about this and just think that. So the next time you see someone criticizing feminism, don't automatically think, "Oh, I need to defend feminism." just think about what the actual criticism is. I'm not saying agree with the person. I'm not saying you have to agree with everything I'm saying. I'm just saying try and understand that it isn't hot air. This is coming from a base. This is coming from visual evidence of the way the movement so often presents itself. And if you can't understand that, then I don't really know what else I can say. I'm not telling people how to think. I'm not telling people that you shouldn't call yourself a feminist. Indeed, that's very often what radical feminists do. They try to impose that onto women and men. So, for example, they will, if someone criticizes feminism, let's just stop this business of, oh, you don't understand feminism. You see, the dictionary definition of feminism, very few people are going to argue with that. Equality for women, wonderful. But I believe that dictionary definitions count for much less than how a movement puts itself forward. So it could be argued that ideological communism is a great thing. Oh, everyone shares the means of production, wonderful. But look at how de facto communism turned out. It ended up with totalitarian dictators and mass misery. And I'm not saying it's the same thing, but when feminists say, "Oh, look up a dictionary," my response is that's irrelevant. What matters is how the movement presents itself. So I would implore reasonable feminists. You don't have to agree with what everything I'm saying, and I'm not saying don't defend something you believe in, but please just try and understand where the criticism comes from. Because from a man's perspective, I'm just saying this now as a man, it does get very, very tiring. Opening a newspaper every single day, there is yet another article about how privileged men are or how much men have it. When you constantly shame people in that way, it just gets boring, but it also then drives wedges between people because nobody likes to be shamed, and that's what it does. That's what the rhetoric does. It it sends a message to men that our very being is a problem. And that gets really boring and really frustrating sometimes. Um, you know, men can be forgiven for thinking, is there anything we can say or do that isn't a problem for feminists? Because that is the impression the feminist movement gives. Also, another issue I take is that the modern Western movement tends to focus very much on issues like posters, the Beachbody thing and the London Underground, and a lot on the whole objectification issue. Now, if that's something that matters to you, I appreciate that you're going to make arguments for that. But I think it makes Western feminism look very petty because for a movement that's all about women's equality, there are issues going on in this world that severely impact women. Look at the situation of honor killings in Pakistan. Look at the way women in the Democratic Republic of Congo have been used as weapons of war, gang raped. There are some serious human rights issues in this world impacting women, and if feminists focus on those things, I believe that would be a lot more in standing with the original concept of feminism, rather than um, this petty approach of just complaining about every little thing that they don't like. That is to say, so let's say a guy is wearing a t-shirt showing a naked lady. Does that really stack up against a woman being stoned to death in Afghanistan? Okay, it might be annoying for you, it might be inappropriate, but in the grand scheme of things, it is not a priority. And I think that's a big mistake that Western feminism has made. It has turned trivial things into major things. It's a storm in a teacup. And that makes a movement look petty, controlling, and frankly rather nasty and intolerant. Because if you're saying, oh, don't tell women what to wear, then frankly, you've got no right to tell men what to wear. It doesn't matter if his t shirt shows a semi naked lady. Now, that might not be appropriate, but in the grand scheme of things, it isn't that big a deal. Because ultimately, in the case of that scientist that was attacked by feminists, it was actually his female friend that gave that t shirt to him. So I just wish that feminists would try and understand that it isn't just these angry men that don't like women having a say. It's got nothing to do with that. Because from my point of view, I don't know how to communicate with someone who every single word you say to them, they're going to perceive it as an insult or an attack on them. How are you supposed to have dialogue? So I think, frankly, certain feminists need to just grow up and stop being so petty and stop being so overly sensitive. Because how are you going to build bridges? It's a bit like the Black Lives Matter movement. And okay, I might be going off on a tangent here, but again, Black Lives Matter. Anything a white person says to them, they're going to perceive as racist. So how can you hope to have any dialogue when you're vilifying the other side? So when feminists vilify men, or when Black Lives Matter vilify white people, there's not going to be any dialogue. And if you are involved in the movement, I believe you have a responsibility to rein in on the more extreme aspects of that movement. If I'm sympathetic to a particular movement and I see that there are extreme factions within that, I will say something to them because I will know that that will damage the image of the movement as a whole. So I do believe that if people want to connect themselves with something, they have a responsibility to do that. So summed up, I'm not for a second saying please agree with everything I'm saying. I'm just saying you need to understand that this isn't some sort of propaganda from an anti-feminist website. It isn't hot air and it's not baseless. Okay, this comes from my own observation with my eyes of what I see and hear, and it's nothing to do with hating women or wanting women to be kept down or anything like that. It's got a lot more to do with just not having much time for what is fundamentally a divisive movement. And I believe that third wave of Western feminism is fundamentally a divisive movement. That's why I call myself an egalitarian, not a masculist, but not a feminist. I am an egalitarian. So, yeah. I hope this message reaches a few people. I'll try and respond to comments if they're civil. If they're just insulting me, then I'm not going to provide a platform for that. But if people are interested in civil dialogue, I'm up for that. And thank you for watching the video. If you've had the patience to sit all the way through this, I appreciate that, and I thank you for it.